is time for sports, brought to you by Cicino's Pizzeria in Waterloo and Geneva. Nate, quite a busy night last night. Obviously, we've got sectional action, and the weather seemed to not be too much of a factor last night.
I think it tried to wreak havoc on the slate, but wasn't really successful. I think only a few games were delayed.
4 total were postponed until today. And I don't think any of them actually really necessarily affected Wayne Finger Lakes too much.
Love to hear that.
So let's take a look at the girls' slate. Last night in an 8-9 game in C1, East Rochester took down Avon. Staying in C1, Bloomfield took down Whitman in the Bomber Barn in Bloomfield. Clyde Savannah took down Addison. I had that backwards. Actually, Addison took down Clyde Savannah. I did have it right. Dunny Bradford is also moving on as they took down Wheatland Chili. So that's for the girls. Yeah, the 2 games that are now scheduled for tonight, Gananda taking on Letchworth and Romulus taking on Friendship over in D2. For the boys, right here in Seneca Falls, Minders lost to the Penyan Mustangs. Score in that game was 44-38. And
low scoring affair there.
Yeah, not a hugely scoring affair. I expected that game to go a little bit of a different direction, but Mustangs are moving on over in B2. And over in Waterloo was playing tough against Rochester Prep. Really close game at half. Waterloo ended up pulling away in that third quarter. Watched a little bit of it on the Huddle stream. They're able to get a win, and so they'll move on in B1. They'll take on Palm Mac in the next couple days. And also in B1, Geneva took down Odyssey as they're going to move on in B1. So really a good Finger Lakes East B1. You have Newark taking on Geneva, Waterloo taking on Palm Mac on one side of the bracket, so that'll be a lot of fun.
Some great games. Those will be 2 great games.
Yeah, those will be Saturday night, both of those games. Newark, Geneva in Newark, and then Waterloo, Palm Mac over in Palmyra, Macedon.
Any feeling on how those might turn out or how those games could turn out potentially?
The Palmyra, Macedon, Waterloo one is really interesting to me because Waterloo beat them early in the year. Palm Mac then beats them pretty soundly. Waterloo beat them early in the year on a Nolan Saluka half-court buzzer beater, which was pretty electric to watch. And then Waterloo had a tough second half of the season. Palm Mac played really well. They kind of found their stride, especially. Didn't necessarily end up winning the league, but they were right there knocking on the door. Yeah. So that one will be really interesting. I would expect Palm Mac to be the better team in that one, but you never know. And then on the other side with Newark and Geneva, Geneva's had an up and down year. They've played some really tough out of league schedules. They had to play Lions later in the year, and they played that game tough. But Newark, they just keep on keeping on. They were injured early in the year, had some guys out, but they really put it on towards the end of the season to take the Finger Lakes East champ. So that'll be an interesting one too between the Reds and the Panthers.
It's all timing. Get hot at the right time. Paul, any differing feelings on those games?
Not particularly. I mean, the B class, especially B1, both boys and girls, really, in all honesty, is the one bracket we really talk about a ton. So in terms of, I guess, last night's affairs into, what will be Saturday's games, you can kind of take your pick. And I mean, I know, right? I mean, we talk about Wayne Fairways, but take your pick out of any of the bunch, in that game and those brackets on Saturday. That's going to be really awesome to watch. I mean, the C's are going to be quite interesting as well in my mind. Those games are tomorrow. But, yeah, I mean, I'm with Nate here. I mean, it's I could see a path that probably any of those teams could probably win. It's kind of awesome to have that after, not to harp on it too much, right, but after how 2020 ended, 2021's not a full slate, 2022 last year, closer to normal, but being back full-fledged this year, it's kind of nice having, in my mind, just take your pick out of the litter, and you probably have a good bet to ride on.
Yeah. Any boys games tonight, Nate?
I had a couple written down. I think there was a couple that got postponed from yesterday. Looks like Attica's taking on North Rose Wolcott. That's in B2. And then Genesee Valley Belfast taking on Naples over in D1. So just 2 games on each side of the slate. Before we get off high school basketball, though, I just mentioned a couple of the scores from last night. There was more. Right. Head over to fingerlakes1.com under the sports section there. Kyle Evans does a great job kind of synopsising all the games with stats and some write-up, too. They're pretty fun. With updated brackets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And staying with basketball, Cuse. I know neither of you watched the game last night, but Paul, I'm curious, as the resident Cuse fan today,
yeah,
how are we feeling?
not good.
I mean, it's over, right? It's
Yeah,
done.
I mean,
Yeah, it's been over, but yeah.
I
It's
mean,
very over.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, now it's,
Nails in the coffin for sure.
Well, I was about to say this is the official. They are laying down the casket into the grave.
It's very over.
Look, this is a Clemson team that up until probably about 3-4 weeks ago really was probably going to run the ACC. Injuries kind of happened. Now they're like back on the bubble a little bit, depending upon what bracketology you look at and stuff like that. But yeah, this was especially after the way Duke went Saturday, needed this game, and pretty much the same showing that they had for Duke. In all honesty, I don't know really where to go on this at this point. I mentioned it Monday. I'll say it again. Like, they just did not look like they were ready to go. I mean, Judah Mintz played good, but for being a point guard, he had 20 points and 1 assist. So who's to blame on the other end of that? Well, if we know enough about Judah at this point that he probably passed the ball around enough, in all honesty, that says something about the guys he was passing it to. Yeah, I mean, like, I saw the score at one point. I just didn't even bother with it. And that's just where we are at this point with this team, right? I think I wouldn't say maybe the whole fan base, obviously, but look, we're at a point, I think, where we as fans are a bit fed up at this point with it. I think we all know what this team could have accomplished this year and probably should have accomplished this year, and it's just not going to happen. And to me, it's a shame for, obviously, the athletes because, look, you come to Syracuse, and we are an alleged, not blue blood program, but, one of the stalwarts, usually, of college basketball. And for the most part, they aren't getting that experience, and who knows what we'll see kind of in the transfer portal at this point, to be honest.
I'm curious. Does the way this current basketball season is going, is any of the frustration within the fan base perhaps partially linked to the way the football season ended? When people think of collegiate sports, obviously there are a ton of collegiate sports, especially at a university like Syracuse. But at the end of the day, talking most about football and basketball,
Sure.
with the way that football season ended and with the way this basketball season has gone on the men's side, is that, if nothing else, maybe partly responsible for the frustration that seems to be building? Because this doesn't look to me, to the outsider, to somebody who doesn't watch Syracuse as closely, the way this team is performed doesn't seem all that different from how Coach Boeheim's teams have performed over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think it's fair to probably have some connection and draw. I think in that sense, I think it's a collective feeling just of the athletic department as a whole.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think it should be lost, right? Syracuse is probably, because of at least getting, I wouldn't say on top of it the way they did, but like being at least ahead of the NCAA, like we avoided some probably sanctions coming down on the women's basketball program with former Coach Q at the time. Your main sports are not what you expect them to be at this point, right? And for Syracuse, you mentioned football, you mentioned basketball, right? But like lacrosse as well for Syracuse. Now the men's program is undefeated to start the year, and they're probably looking to be better than they have been, but like it's been over a decade since they won a national title there, and it's interesting. Now the women's lacrosse is looking by far the better of the two teams, and
I think they're undefeated too, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and they're I believe, I can't remember where exactly they are ranked wise.
They mashed a team the other day by like 10 or 15.
But you're talking about a collective athletic program that I think most Orange fans are rather over at this point with. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. I mean, I have before, but like, to me, Wildhack's just a money man, and if it comes to actually improving the athletic department, I just don't think he can do it in the sense of athletics. And it is what it is, but that's just where I stand, and it's one of those things where I've kind of, I wouldn't say accepted it, but it's like, well, what do we expect at this point? Like, we don't change isn't coming if it hasn't already happened, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like, if anything, conditions to create a winning team have gotten easier,
Correct.
right? Because of the changes with NIL and things
Yes.
like that. And yet it seems to be that this, if nothing else, Syracuse basketball and football seems to be kind of plateaued. If you want to
Yeah.
if you want to be as optimistic as you possibly can be about it.
Yeah, I mean, plateau's a pretty good term I'd probably use there. Maybe not for football. I think football probably has a little more wiggle room still to kind of
Right.
go forward. Whether or not that includes Tino Babers, I think could be up for discussion, but I think football could be the spot where there is some wiggle room, kind of, in a way. Basketball, the only reason why I don't think there's wiggle room is just because we know what the program is and what it means at this stage of the game. And that's not a knock on football. Like I said, I mean, football was actually what put Syracuse on the map back in the day athletically.
Right.
To put it bluntly, I mean, one-time national champions and formerly a running back, obviously Jim Brown, what would have been Ernie Davis, Larry Zonka, Floyd Little, the names kind of make for themselves there. So I think there's more room there than there is basketball, but flatline/plateaued is a really good term I would use for the time being.
Yeah, Paul. And hey, Nate, like you and I always say when we're on the golf course, answer simple.
Play better.
Play better. That's it.
Yeah, it's just the disappointing part to me for Syracuse basketball, especially last night and all season too. Giving up 91 points, that just can't happen.
Get blown out like repeatedly. That's
Yeah.
just is
I mean,
not a. It doesn't say a lot about the psyche of your team either at that point.
No,
like where are you mentally as a team if that's what's happening to you 2 straight games?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much done with zone defense. That's kind of done with that.
Yeah.
Kind of ready to move on from that. But giving up, just watching zone is really depressing to me because you watch teams shoot 40-50% from three because they're just launching wide open threes.
Right.
Because that's part of the zone. That's part of the zone and how you defend a little bit.
Right. The zone was essentially was more or less adapted because at the time you forced the ball outside for the opportunity out there because at the time it's lower percentage. And look, to be fair, the three-pointer
Not anymore.
The three-pointer is still the lowest percentage shot in basketball, but it's only lower by fractions now as opposed to
You get more points when you hit a
chunks.
three than when you hit a two.
Right.
Yeah, and basketball in
Well,
general has just gone to more of a shooting
right,
game than
so-
it is a
and
beat it
look,
up game.
And look, the zone does have a spot. I'm not going to run away and say the zone is outdated. The zone has a spot, but you need to know what type of zone and what form of it you need to run. Like Jim Boeheim's full court defense is usually some form of a 1-3-1 zone, and it works well because you can trap and bait and do stuff like that. But half court zones at this point are primitive in nature. If you're going to do a half court zone, I think it needs to flop at this point. And look, you want to go to a team locally that does it, like the Palmac boys. They run a 3-2 half court zone a lot of times, and it works well because you have more bodies up front, and you stop the shot from happening outside now. So I don't know if you necessarily have to flip it on college. I think it's a little bit different at that point just because of obviously talent disparities. But
Right.
like
Yep.
you can't run a 2-3, especially if you just don't have the athlete up front, aka like Joe Girard in the Syracuse situation, to go and cover that ground. It all comes down to who do you have in that zone and who's where at that point. So I don't full-fledged go zone is for cowards because I do think there's a spot for it, but in today's game, it's few and far between at this point.
Nobody plays a zone. That's really all. That's my answer to that.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody in college basketball really plays a zone. So it's like, I'm done with it.
We'll see Syracuse in action again this weekend, Saturday at 5 p.m. They will be at Pittsburgh. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be talking about bacon on the Lakin. Stay tuned.